Hi, welcome to another episode of Everything Digital Health. I'm Marcus Bohr. I'm a GP and a self-taught clinical hacker, I guess, a software developer and clinical informatician. And today I'm very pleased to be joined by Mark Bailey, who is likewise a clinician who codes, but is also a respiratory physician down in the Cotswolds area, I believe. So Mark, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit further? And we'll go from there.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Marcus, for having me here. So yes, Clinician Who Codes. I think that's my main title, my real passion, and the side hustle is just being a clinician on the wards, of course. But that's what's paying the bills. It's an interesting place to be, digital health, and I've seen quite a lot of the videos you've had with other people, and everyone gets into this almost by luck or bad luck, depends how you look at it. But maybe a bit of a backstory to how I got into digital and so on. I had a previous career. I've had a few previous careers. The first one was in chemistry with computer sciences, but I realized there was not that much money in computers at the time. This was a long time ago, back in 2000. Yeah. But I dropped the computer bit because chemistry was doing quite well and going into the pharmaceutical industry. I did a bit of research and I realized actually instead of testing drugs, which I was doing in the pharmaceutical industry, I wanted to prescribe them. So then I became a doctor and that's how I got here. But I've always been interested in digital. I was born in Hong Kong. We've got a MacBook off the black market. So I was playing with computers back then, built computers, taken them apart since then. My dad bought me an Arduino Uno, if anyone out there knows what that is. It's like Internet of Things where you can program. Yeah. So it's fantastic open source community, and we can probably talk about sort of stuff later, but open source community where people can build things, share what they build and so on. I always made my house basically just for fun. But then my bosses at work, and I was a respiratory staff grade at the time in Gloucester, realized that I can tinker with computers and not just with printers and so on, but actually build things and code things. So they said, can you just automate some of your workload and our workload? And I did that over a few years. And that's how I got into digital health. And this was back in 2018. So not that long ago. So I integrated my clinical knowledge and my digital knowledge back then.
So what project was that? Was that Spiritum Duo?
That was the original Spiritum. Yeah.
Oh, Spiritum before it was Duo. Okay.
Yeah. So there's a few Spiritums. Okay.
Assume that no one hearing this will have know what the Spiritum is. So you tell us what that did for your automation.
So Spiritum is just Latin for breathe, and it was a respiratory lung department. So we thought that was kind of funny, but maybe a bit
cute
nose sort of thing. Yeah. But basically, I was brought in as a staff grade back in 2017-18 in Gloucester to help with a sleep apnea medicine clinic backlog of 300 plus patients who've been waiting over a year for treatments after having their investigations. It was basically looking at reports and looking at squiggly lines, diagnosing patients, writing a letter to the patient to say if they need treatment or not, come in, yes or no. Very repetitive, very protocol driven, almost like, oh, the computer could just do all this. And I thought, actually, the computer could do all this. So I started writing programs. I started with macros in Word. Ooh, exciting, very high tech stuff.
Wow.
I'm like, okay, that's kind of working. Little drop down list for mild, moderate, severe sleep apnea syndrome. What's their BMI, their body mass index, and all those little things. Do they smoke or not? Things that are risk factors making sleep apnea syndrome, so breathing a problem at night worse. And then I'm like, okay, this is okay. What I had at the time was a piece of paper where I said, it's mild, moderate, or severe, and the secretary would just, put it into this Word macro and it spit out and print it. I thought, well, this could be better. So I did a spreadsheet in Excel with macros. That's basically the same thing. The secretary would just press print, and I just changed put a patient in the spreadsheet and eat through the list of patients and spit out these letters. Like, oh, this could be better. And then my boss said, oh, could you do something like a database? It's like, okay. We had Microsoft Access 2013, I think.
It's a very familiar incremental path of gateway drugs almost, of Word macros up to more and more involved things until everybody goes to an Access database, and then you go through that into something else.
Yeah. So I bought myself 2 books. One was Microsoft Access for Dummies, and the other one was, and I don't know if they do the Dummies series anymore, and one was Visual Basics Access in Access. Visual Basics for applications for Access for Dummies as well. So I read through those. Over a year, I built this Microsoft Access database, the user interface, the database as well. But then I realized, oh, it doesn't connect to any of the systems. So I didn't even know about clinical informatics and digital health at the time. I was doing this all by myself and knew nothing about, what other people were doing. I was thinking, oh, I need to connect to other things. I was looking at interoperability at this point. So yeah, I was like, oh, what can I do? Oh, how about some RPA, some robotic process automation? I got involved with AutoHotkey and connected this Microsoft Access database to all these other things by screen scraping and all those sort of things. And I realized there's some Windows APIs I can use, really started connecting to everything. And so that was Spiritum, that database. And then there was Quick Spiritum, which actually took the RPA stuff and made a standalone program. We did a bit of a QI project on it, and realized it saved 33% of time for clinicians do, routine admin around clinical stuff. Then Spiritum Duo,
amazing.
which
this is the kind of stuff that I think it probably puts like NHS IT people's nerves on edge a little bit when they hear about clinicians doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it does.
But you can see why we do it, because we are collectively capable of building stuff, even simple things to improve our lives, and yet our systems don't have those things. And so it's completely natural to want to improve the tools we use, especially when it saves time. And in a way, it's only a few years ago that robotic process automation of the kind you are talking about was all over the place in the health tech conferences, when the sales stands were all selling RPA as a sticking plaster over the crap interoperability that we have.
Yes.
But it's okay when they do it, but it's not okay when clinicians do it. I think that's that's an interesting observation, in that this is what the industry went towards, certainly for a while. It's now obsessed with AI, of course, but a few years ago, RPA was everywhere. And yet, when clinicians try and do this, they often encounter a lot of resistance from inside their trusts. And I do think some of that is well intentioned, in that we don't just want people chaotically doing anything all over the place, but doing nothing is not an option. And at the moment, that one of the reasons why the NHS is in such a dire straits in terms of the clinical workload is because our computers do not help us in these ways. They slow us down rather than speeding us up.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a whole series about clinicians who code, and we've had a debate about it, didn't we, a few years ago? Clinicians who code, and should we be allowed to code? And it's interesting to hear people argue against it, and they're quite strong arguments, or emotional strong arguments. Whether they're good arguments is to be debated as well. But we
can definitely do that in a future episode. I think that would be a really good one.
Yeah. But what I find, and I'm going to take it, I'm coming from a Clinician Who Codes point of view, is that we understand the problems, we understand the pinch points, the pain points, and where things can and can't be improved. And someone who's purely digital can understand how computers think and so on. But you need someone who's the translator in the middle that understands both worlds and make these things happen. Now, of course, back in 2017, 18, when I was building Microsoft Access database and knew nothing about, clinical safety and interoperability and clinical safety groups and, GDPR and all those sort of things. Yeah, looking back at it, it's like, I shouldn't have been doing that. But you made a good point that, why aren't we allowed to do that in sort of maybe innovation centers or research centers, or taught about these things, or work in collaboration with people to actually improve what we're doing as clinicians? The problem with the NHS at the moment, I mean, there's loads, but the two big problems in my mind at the moment is there's not enough money, there's not enough people, and we're trying to do so much with very little time. And unfortunately, the digital systems that have been put in place, and I'm trying not to be too negative about this, but the digital systems in place slow us down. I mean, there's a very good research, and I can't remember the names involved in the research project. There was this group in America who looked at EPRs, so electronic patient records, about the amount of time you spend with patients versus the amount of time you spend with the computer. 15 minutes with the patient, 60 minutes with the computer. So it's over the same amount of time just on the computer trying to find the details that I need. And it's frustrating. Like, I would wish there was a summary that showed me everything I need in front of me right now. Of course, pieces of paper, when we wrote on those in notes, and we still do, we're hearing in Swindon, you can write it and put stuff you need the next day or the next day after, or that your colleagues will need over the evening or weekend when there's cover and so on. the digital systems don't seem to work for us. They're just data collection tools built by who knows who, that collect the data and present it in a way that you have to run around and find and log in different ways, and you can go into the bad user center design and everything like that.
They don't
sorry,
allow,
that's a small rant there.
I mean, yeah, all absolutely right. That stuff, I completely agree. Clinical systems don't allow clinicians to become power users of their systems, really. I think that possibly there are a couple of systems that are quite configurable, and I've actually heard good things about Epic, bizarrely enough. When it's installed, it's very expensive, and there's very large amounts of sort of project work making it bespoke and perfect for your hospital. But I've heard some clinicians say that they actually do respect it in terms of what it provides for them. But by and large, we're not all using Epic, and we certainly wouldn't want a world in which the entire NHS was on Epic or any single supplier, because that's a route towards monopoly and disaster. But yeah, the features in GP systems, the features in hospital systems, they're just not quite good enough to give us complete control and let us really improve the speed that we can do things. To some extent, GP systems are a bit better.
Well, you guys have been digitized for the last 40 years, haven't you?
Yeah, and back in the day, there was something called EMIS LV, which I did use briefly when I was a locum in the Lake District once. And you could keyboard drive the entire thing, because it was like, it was all keyboard and screen. It didn't support mouse. So once you got all of that under your fingers, you could be talking to the patient and still typing and sorting out the prescription. There was a lot you could do just because you could become a little bit of a power user. And it was almost like a court stenographer type of muscle memory thing. You just knew that your fingers were under the right F keys and that sort of thing. But by and large, we don't get those systems. So let's move away from that area, which is, a little bit negative in that we're focusing on the things that we don't have. But let's talk about some of the stuff that we've done together, because we've had a couple of projects together. I think originally we met because you joined the Faculty of Clinical Informatics when that was a thing. And
God, does anyone remember that? Yeah.
And just to highlight the power of having Marcus Bohr as your mentor, within a year, you were the chair of the Faculty of Clinical Informatics.
Yeah, that's how you do it. That's the recipe. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, no one's ever going to beat that record, right? The faculty sadly fell apart shortly after that, not because of Mark. Mark was
may I say, not because of me.
But we will be definitely having an episode of the podcast in the future where we talk about the faculty, because it still hasn't been replaced. There's still a faculty-shaped gap in the clinical informatics world. So, but we'll come back to that. But that's how we originally met.
I've been wondering about that story, and it's a good story to tell just from an emotive point. But there's a lot of learning from there, and how government and funding and charities.
We will do that.
Yeah,
for sure.
So much to say there, and I don't know how best to deliver it, but it's an interesting, at least, story that I would love to somehow tell.
So why don't you tell the viewers about Let's Do Digital, because that's an upcoming conference that's happening in October. I've been part of that as a speaker and sort of helping out kind of thing, but it's your conference, so tell us about it.
I wouldn't say it's mine though. Yeah, I do a lot of the work. So let's talk digital, let's do digital, same sort of things. The entity that houses it and runs it's called Let's Do Digital. But let's talk about the conference. That's what you brought up. So let's talk digital. This is really interesting. It goes back to Spiritum Duo, actually. It's all interlinked. So Spiritum Duo, which is like the grandchild of Spiritum and Quick Spiritum, was a pathway management system that was open source and generic prototype, may I add, that was going to help improve lung cancer management in Gloucestershire and anywhere else that wanted to use it. Now, a lot of people who are involved with in implementation, digital implementation and improvements will probably recognize this story, that it can be bloody difficult to implement something new, especially technology. And I had not loads of people being the barrier to making this happen. And there's lots of people that were for it. And I won't name names, but huge people at the top and people in the middle and at the front line, and also for the sort of lung cancer alliances and stuff like that. But we had one or two people who shall be kept nameless for this podcast webinar, who just decided, and they were the key people for digital. That's enough, I guess. That was stopping this happening. So me and another doctor decided, let's bring this to the surface, this issue of people trying to implement something digital, and let's have a conference with a debate talking about, should we allow innovation and happen at the front line. And that was the first debate we had with Marcus and the CCIO for the county. A really interesting debate. I think you got criticized for your scarf at the end or something along those lines. So yeah, it was, and I think we had a good debate, and people went away thinking maybe we should allow innovation happen at the front line. I had conversations after that with maybe creating a clinical informatics innovation hub in Gloucester, but yeah, that didn't materialize. But the whole conference started because of my frustration, other people's frustration about trying to make things happen. And we wanted to have those conversations and also see how other people have failed and also succeeded and learn from them. And that's kind of the theme that we've been going with for the last few years. This is the 4th year coming up for the October 23rd, 24th October. Cool. In person and a virtual hybrid conference, but it's the same theme: innovation at the front line. But this year's second, but just almost on the same level, theme is education.
Cool. It's a really interesting conference because there is no element of kind of sales pitch. There are no stands from like vendors. Obviously, vendors are very welcome to come along to it, but it seems it's very grassroots feeling. And it's got a nice community feel. It's a little bit like NHS Hack Day in that regard. It's got that kind of small scale community. But I've made some really interesting connections just talking to people who've presented stuff at Let's Do Digital. I suppose I should probably say, like, I've made lots of professional connections, but yes. I also met my partner and fiance at the last Let's Do Digital. So it's got a lot of special memories for us.
Yeah, but, I'm very happy I'm a digital health matchmaker.
We've got, there were some really interesting projects where people have clearly struggled against some clinical thing that they just want to get done. Often it's like a form that they're trying to turn into some form of digital artifact. And if their EPR doesn't do it natively and the Trust IT people don't feel that they can resource any kind of help there, then as the clinician, you're often left to do it yourself. And so there are quite a few clinicians who'd come up with really interesting things. So there's a headache diary by Alexandre Mathy, who, really interesting bit of work, created in open source, tiny, very low cost thing. And that is the kind of thing, to my mind, that what we need at NHS scale is talent scouts that are going to every trust and talking about where there is these great little innovations and saying, great. Because quite often clinicians who code don't want anything for the idea. They just want the idea to be made real.
Because it helps them and their patients at the end of the day.
Yeah. And what they often find is like a lot of closed doors. And I've heard this many times. So obviously closed doors, for good reason, sometimes it's difficult to get things deployed in your own trust. Then at national level, nobody wants to know. There is no talent spotting sort of, let's go and find interesting technological advances from around the NHS and promote them up into the kind of national scene. And then quite often in frustration, some of these people go to programs like the NHS Clinical Entrepreneurs Program, which is a great program, but it does tend to have a focus on turning your idea into a business and making some money on it. and having some venture capital backing in order to be able to fund the development, and all those kind of things are fine and well. But what if you're a clinician who just doesn't want to run a big business? What if you don't
it's a lot of
want
work.
to
It's a lot of work.
What if you're actually quite happy seeing patients and doing good work? What if you don't want to monetize the product because you want it to be open source? Because the venture capitalists will not touch that generally. So it creates a lot of problems. We just need a pathway that helps people get from, I have an idea, I've done a little proof of concept, now I need help from the NHS to make it sort of robust, clinically safe, have the right information governance controls around it, sustainable, open source. All those things can be put around it to make it something that we will always have in the future. And then we start making progress, Anyway, that is a slight diversion there, but
if I want to add to that, actually, no, I think it's a great idea having scouts going out, like, football, American football, they have scouts going out for looking for talent. Have people go out for talent, but don't have to take them away from where they're working. Actually find what they're trying to do, see, build on top of what they're building, actually give them all the experience and knowledge that they need to do this. Actually, make these great things, share the knowledge with other people who can just build on top of the, on shoulders of giants sort of stuff, and we can build great things together. And we've had many conversations like this. Why don't we just, like, everyone around the country make a little thing that's just great at what it does and share it? And suddenly we've got thousands of great little things that you can add together and make amazing systems that joins all these things together. And I don't want to sort of sound like I'm actually delivering anything like that, but the Let's Do Digital community, where we have quite a few tutors now, we've been doing courses on coding for clinicians and also teaching about digital health. I want to teach people about these things that I would have loved to have had taught to me when I started out back in 2017, 2018. Now, hopefully I can start doing some of this work with a new job, which I may be taking up soon. I won't divulge any more than that, with a university to try and deliver some of this stuff with a big name. Hopefully that all pans out. And I really want to give people the information that I've learned over the last few years, the stuff I would have wanted when I started, the Oxford Handbook of Clinical Informatics, if there was such a thing. I wish there was when I started out, that cheese and onion handbook in your pocket, though it's on your phone now. I just want to have that, and I'm still learning. There's so much to learn. It's such a, I think you can subspecialize in digital health. There's just so much to learn, like interoperability or data standards and all this sort of stuff. There's just so much to learn. And anyway, I could talk for hours on that as well.
We talked about this at the Faculty of Clinical Informatics when it existed, the need for a textbook of clinical informatics. And I think one of the things that actually held them back was that no one could, in all honesty, say that they knew what they would write in that textbook because of the lack of accepted gold standards. I mean, if you were talking about the Oxford Handbook, cheese and onion clinical medicine thing, part of the reason you can have a page in there that tells you what to do with, I don't know, subarachnoid hemorrhage is because we know what the treatment is supposed to be. There is a gold standard. It's been tried.
There's research behind it.
Research around it. Well, what in clinical informatics can you say has got anything other than the most superficial backslapping research about it? So we've got very vague qualitative and quantitative type of analyses, but nothing that actually approaches the level of academic rigor that you would need for clinical medicine. So we don't actually know if there is evidence that snomed-ct improves care, for example. You can only hypothesize that coding things might be better than having free text. But is there proof? I don't know if there's, those are the questions that are not yet answered. And then going further than that, the standards. So are there standards for, say, clinical user interfaces? No, there are not. There are so many things that need to be standardized and improved. And so I think we're right at the start of a specialty. This is like anesthesia in 1890 or something. That's where we're at. Very, very early on. And that's
it's almost cowboy sort of marketplace, isn't it?
And I think one of the things that Let's Do Digital does really well, that teaching that community, is we're building a bigger and bigger community of clinicians who code. And gradually that will reach a tipping point where we actually have critical mass, and we are, to some extent, dictating a little bit of the narrative around what a clinical user interface should look like, because we will write those interfaces and we will open source them and share them as, you know, the Twitter bootstrap of clinical interface, where you can just pull that into an existing app and suddenly you've got a bar at the top that gives you all the address data and allergies, and some of the components that otherwise would have to be hand knitted can be shared. And the rest of the tech world gets this. They have libraries for everything. They have APIs for everything. And we don't.
And I mean, my real passion at the end of the day, and that's what got me into this. I never wanted to learn to code. And I have nothing against coding, but I never thought, oh, I want to learn how to code. Actually, it came the other way around. I have a problem, which is I need to automate how to, you know, write these sleep study reports. I got so many of them. It's monotonous and boring, and I'm going to make a mistake because it's so boring and monotonous. How can I automate it? And I thought, or how can I get this done easier? And it's like, and I guess it's a sign of laziness, but I thought I'll go and learn and code to improve and help me with my laziness, make this thing easier. But what I realized at the end of the
I would say, you know, don't ever call these things laziness. This is optimization.
Yeah,
so
I know. I mean, tongue in cheek.
Learning to code because you're lazy, it doesn't scan, does it? No one learns to code because they're lazy. You learn to code because you're unreasonable, and unreasonable people make the future, because they're the ones who can't accept the status quo. And you say, this has to be better. This has to be done better than this. And you learn to code, and then you can do something.
Yeah. And my biggest passion around everything in my career actually right now is end user centered design, which you would argue is probably the worst passion to have in the NHS, because there's none of it, or very, very, very little. But that is where my real passion is, about building things that actually work for the end user. And I'll be banging that drum until the end of my days, and we can have a whole talk about that as well.
Yeah, I think clinical user experience, I think, would make a really good, interesting discussion. Possibly could roll that up into the common user interface, which was something that there used to be something called the common user interface back in the days of the National Project for IT. And it was designed by a lot of clinicians. I think there was quite a lot of clinical input in there, clinical safety input. But unfortunately, it was kind of commissioned to be done by Microsoft. And so the actual output of it looked an awful lot like the Microsoft ribbon, which was at the top at the time of every single new Microsoft Office component, because in 2007 they were just bringing in the ribbon to all the Office things. And surprise, surprise, the NHS Common User Interface looks loads like the Microsoft ribbon. And one of the only reference implementations that I ever found was in Microsoft Silverlight, which is a now utterly defunct and totally insecure web building framework type of thing. It was a bit like Shockwave Flash or something like that. So it never saw the prime time. And to add insult to injury, no one ever decided to refresh that work and say, let's make it out of web components, for example, in JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, which would have been really useful.
Yeah.
Instead, in 2019 or 2020, they just canned the project. There's a blog post that's still up on what was NHSX's website, where they decided that they were going to deprecate them and not replace them. And I just thought that was absolutely lacking in any kind of vision as an NHS.
I really like the whole let's have a standardized layout. I think we've talked about it before, the cockpit analysis for planes, you know, or a car. There's a steering wheel here, there's some pedals, there's a gear stick, there's a window, you know, there's indicators. It's all kind of in the right place. If you jump from one car to another, you can pretty much do it. Now, you know, resident doctors, who used to be called junior doctors, we're now Americanizing ourselves. When they change hospital every 4 months, 6 months, they're having this trouble of relearning how to fly the bloody plane, which is, you know, whole
in flight. Yeah, and they don't get sent to a training camp to do it in a simulator. They are caring for real live people who can die or be significantly harmed, and we just think that that's acceptable as a profession, and it's absolutely criminal that there's so much variation in the user interfaces and no real nothing that I would call clinically appropriate in terms of the amount of training time to get you really up to speed and fluent and safe with a new clinical system. You're just expected to move, and in flight, you've got to get used to a completely new system. Not surprisingly, medication errors happen, documentation gets lost or accidentally written in the wrong patient's record, and all these kind of things that, I mean, it never happened with paper to some extent. I mean, I never, ever accidentally wrote an entire clerking in somebody else's handwriting in the wrong notes, because I was writing on a piece of paper. It was just very straightforward to know where you were writing it. And whereas with digital systems, this happened quite a few times. You would be using a computer on wheels in the A&E department. You'd start typing your clerking. You'd go back to the patient to quickly ask a question. When you came back, someone else had logged into that computer, but it wasn't obvious. And you're now typing in the wrong patient's notes in what is ostensibly someone else's handwriting, because they're logged in. You're logged in as someone else. That we have not solved that at all. In fact, computers and digital systems have made that 100 times worse.
And it comes back to the research and standardization. If you look at, if you take away digital, if we go back to the Stone Age, or paper age, shall we call it, we have standardized medicine. Like, you know, if you had a heart attack, you get these medications. If you had a stroke, you can get thrombolysis. You know, you've got asthma, you get an inhaler. But we haven't standardized how digital is used to give basic good patient and best patient care. And we need research around that, definitely. But some of the stuff is just bloody obvious. Like, don't force mandatory fields that changes a clinician's workflow. You know, give us the data and information we need in the best possible, accurate, timely fashion, and all these sort of things, and have things that are roughly in the same place. And anyway, and computers at work. I mean, basic stuff.
Yeah, there's almost a hierarchy of needs around the IT stuff that you could have. Yes, you need adequate clinical workspaces. So actually the physical space needs to be adequate so that you can have computers in there. Then you need adequate numbers of computers. They need to have a decent specification and good sized screens so we can actually see the information that we need to use. We can't be expected to use a rubberized wipe clean keyboard on which none of the actual letters are still remaining. And I've seen this. I have a photograph of this where the rubberized keyboards got used so much that the actual key legends had worn off. Now, even a really experienced touch typer can't use those keyboards because there is no, like,
there's no tactile feedback.
There's no tactile feedback. They're often a slightly different layout to a what you'd call a standard keyboard, you know, a 106 key keyboard. So they aren't standardized. They're a bit funny looking, and the tactile feedback's not there. So you can't even argue that the reason that I can't use that keyboard is because I'm not good enough touch typer. It's actually just a keyboard should be, you should be able to read what letter you're pressing. This is the level that we're operating at in reality every day in NHS trusts. But when you talk to people at conferences and when you hear the kind of level of discussion that's had at in essentially what you might call the ivory towers of commissioning bodies and governmental level, they're talking about AI and they're talking about single patient records and federated data platforms, and they think of everything as though all the other things lower down in the hierarchy of needs have already been solved.
Hierarchy,
yeah, and they have not been solved. This, if we could just get people to actually understand what has not been solved and fix those things first, we would eventually be able to get to single patient record. And not only that, we'd have solved things like data quality, so that the data you get out at national level means something, whereas a lot of data that you would get out of any proposed future system is not necessarily of high enough quality to do research on or to make planning decisions at NHS scale.
Yeah, and we've spoken about it before, and I've written about this before as well. The sort of, I call it the Bailey's pyramid, but it's basically like Marlow period of needs, where you need to have, clinical knowledge, basic, workforce environments like toilets and eating and sitting areas, the computers, the digital, the connectivity, the clinical decision support system, and at the top, if you wish, is the AI. And like you said, we're all talking about AI. RPA was at the top at one point, but this is the Gartner hype graph as well, where I think we're at the top of that graph. But we're trying to get AI involved when the data quality and everything else below is non-existent. I'm worried we're going off on on a tangent again, and I'm being grumpy old men here. But I
Well,
think
not at all.
sometimes
I
you have
think
to acknowledge the problems.
this is it. This is exactly what this YouTube channel is about, really. It's about giving us a platform to talk about the real stuff, um, outside of governmental agendas and outside of sponsors and outside of what we are told to think, but more, we're going to talk the truth about what really is out there and the problems that we really do face.
And the problem I find, though, is that the problems that you and me and everyone else at the shop floor see as problems, like computers that don't turn on or crash or connectivity and multiple logins, it's not the sexy stuff that politicians want to talk about to the public, but it's the most important stuff to build up towards the pinnacle, whatever, implementation we're trying to get towards.
Yeah, there's a very interesting guy that used to run Team Sky, the cycling team back in, this is in the sort of 2010 sort of era. And he ended up also running Team GB, the cycling team that won practically everything in the London Olympics. And he had this mantra about marginal gains. And so he knew that he couldn't make an individual athlete 10% stronger or faster just by shouting at them or training them harder. But what he could do was take away every little piece of friction that they might otherwise encounter in their training day and in their performance days. And it was little tiny things like when they went from hotel to hotel, staying overnight on a Tour de France type of, on a long cycle tour, they could bring their own pillow with them. Yeah. And so when they got to bed, it would be their pillow that was the exact same every night. So they slept a bit better. They had a team psychologist. They then also went through all the bikes and they looked at every tiny little optimization that could be made. And that sort of thinking is where we'd like to be.
But that works. That works in the end as well, because small increments make huge saving, because it's such a big organization. It's one of the 10th biggest organizations in the world. So small changes make big rewards.
And I think that we would take that analogy rather than marginal gains, because I don't know if we're really in a position to make gains at this stage, but we can stop slowing down our clinicians. So I've come up with this term called clinical drag, which I think
that sounds good.
Clinical drag is experienced when you are trying to do something and the system is slowing you down. So the real job of a clinician is to meet with the patient, develop a rapport, find out the information that's needed, and then make a decision with the patient as to what we're going to do. That's the job. Everything after that is just making those things happen. So if you've got to fill in a 12-page pro forma in order to get a certain action done, that's clinical drag. Whether it's on paper or digital, that's clinical drag. That we need to have a serious, multi-pronged and sort of coordinated effort to reduce clinical drag. And I think by having a name for it, it helps, because you can say, look, that's just clinical drag. That is not helping me deliver better service to the patient. All that is slowing me down, is making it harder to get to the next patient. That's what we need to solve.
There's that. I think that's one of the biggest issues I face is clinical drag. As a clinician, if it wasn't there, if we took away clinical drag tomorrow, I would be extremely happy. I could see patients quicker. I could see more of them. I'd be less stressed. It would make a huge difference.
And your Spiritum Duo and those kind of things, they are tools that were aimed at reducing that clinical drag. That's what they were for. And so there is no professional group that knows how to fix these things better than clinicians because we're the ones experiencing the clinical drag. So yeah,
we did a clinical drag coefficient for things. Yeah, just stamp it. This is like efficiency of fridges. Is it an A plus? And I presume that's less drag.
Ooh,
And
I
then was
like
it a D
that.
or an E? Yeah,
I
yeah.
like that.
We should have that stamp.
I like that a lot.
Mm.
So yeah, anybody who's listening to this who thinks, right, I'm going to write the clinical drag coefficient, you have my permission to take that and do it. That would be so interesting to see, because competition does seem to sometimes make people wake up a bit. And if we could say the clinical drag coefficient of our hospital is much lower than the clinical drag coefficient of other ones, then you might be able to attract different staff. And
well, that kind of segues into something else. I don't know if you remember the conversation I had with yourself and other people about health ENV, which is an environment for like learning and building and testing, but also the other half of it was actually like a imagine an eBay place where people are selling their wares, their EPRs and so on, but with user feedback. And you could have your, drag efficiency, stamp there as well. And so people can actually see which system they should and shouldn't buy. And I know there'll be loads of litigation of these big EPR companies saying, you can't say this about us. Like, well, actually, we're spending a lot of money on you guys, billions of pounds a year. We should know where the money's going and what shouldn't be and should be bought. Anyway, that's something I'm building on.
Have reviews of systems. And funnily enough, about 10 years ago, I did something called the Clinical Software Usability Survey, and we didn't get sued by anybody. I did this with John Huxmer, who runs Digital Health Intelligence, or did at the time. He sold that company. But we did a full usability survey across the entire market of EPRs that were available in the UK. And actually, the suppliers were okay about it. Even some of them that did very badly felt as though they'd got some value out of having that feedback.
I don't think there's any problem with having knowledge and data to work with. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I wrote up that as a sort of open access thing. I don't believe in academic papers particularly because they just get hidden in journals, and I don't believe in anything other than just publishing it out there. So there is this thing called the Clinical Software Usability Survey. It's based on an existing survey that was called the Software Usability Survey, and I just added some clinically relevant questions. So it's 5 questions for software as a whole and 5 questions on top of that are about its clinical usability. And so it's quite quick to do, and you immediately get a score that can be aggregated, and then you can look at a system and say how usable its actual users thought it was. And you do get measurable differences between systems. It's not like everything comes out at really low usability. Some users gave great feedback that their system was good. I'll put a link in the show notes to that, the work. And of course, anybody who wants to rerun that survey or use that scale or modify that scale, you're very freely able to do that. It's
I might be grabbing that from you soon, actually. John Salter's been looking at the spread of EPRs across the country and doing some graphs around that. And I think putting some star ratings against each of them would be very interesting.
Yeah. We're building in the RCPCH a digital solutions catalog, which is essentially like a crowdsourced list of digital solutions that pediatricians are using. And we're planning to use the Clinical Software Usability Survey as a way of getting a semi-objective measure of how useful they are, usable they are, as well as some more qualitative results, which will be more like free text of people passing comments. And that's like a review site. That's a review site for clinical software for pediatricians.
Good. I'll have a look now, actually.
That's happening.
Yeah.
It's on its way.
Cool.
That's going to be built into a discourse forum, because actually everything you need to do that is already a part of discourse or can be added as a plugin. So, well, I think we've covered quite a lot, and I don't want to get these too long for people to sort of watch in one session, really. So I'm always aiming for around the sort of 40-45 minute mark. So I think that's probably a good point to wrap up. But I would definitely like to have you back on the show, because I think we definitely need to talk about the digital clinical safety platform and some of the clinical safety work we've done. But that probably deserves its own episode. And yeah, we mentioned quite a few other things that need a revisit, so we can come back and talk about those definitely in the future. So once again, thank you for being on the show, Mark, and I'd love to have you back on. But for now, goodbye. Bye now.
Yeah, it'd be my pleasure. Thank you so much. Bye.